All right, welcome everybody. It is the Wednesday edition of Talkback, and we have a lovely guest in the studio, and it's not John King.
What?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm not lovely, apparently, but great.
No, you're not. You're ruggedly handsome.
Thank
How's
you.
that? All right.
Thank you. My wife will pay you later.
Okay, no problem.
Today on the show we have Sara Rinfret. She's a professor of political science and public administration at the University of Montana. She specializes in that quirky field of politics. We're not in that season right now of actual policy rather than just public pugilism. It should be a really interesting discussion, because when you actually get to the meat and potatoes of topics and actually have to solve problems in the real world is where things really heat up.
Right.
And heat up might be a good way to start this conversation, because we're going to be talking about environmental policy today, mostly. And there's one thing I know about Missoulians. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. You're extremely interested in environmental policy, whether it is you're upset because you think there's overreach on one side of the fence, or because you're upset because you think the apocalypse is coming and I'm causing it by throwing trash in the receptacle,
or by driving to work,
or whatever it might be.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a town that forced a brewery in order to get a license to build a bike rack, for example. So we have some.
No. It's a bike corral.
Okay,
for crying out loud, John, let's get it right.
It's so Western.
City Council, they craft these things so carefully. I mean, they don't call it a bike rack. It's a bicycle corral.
All right.
Thank you. And as a matter of fact, I think there's an E at the end because all the bike riders are expected to sing as they're leaving the tavern.
Corrale. All right.
Sorry.
Well, let's shift over to someone who knows what they're talking. Sara, welcome to the program.
Thank you
I
for
apologize
having me.
ahead of time.
She's already got a coat on. She's leaving. Anyway, so welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. You're new to Missoula.
Yes, we have been here for about a year. Really excited to be here. We have awesome students at the University of Montana.
And we haven't scared you off yet?
No,
Okay.
no, it's a great place to be.
All right. So what brought you to Missoula, aside the fact that this is a great place, to have a job at the university?
Right. I went to grad school at Northern Arizona, and so my husband and I really enjoy the West, and so we just really moved back out West, and really happy to be here.
Super. So. All right. So now tell us what your average day is like as a professor at the University of Montana in the political science department.
Yeah, no, I teach several classes during the week, so, usually get there around, at least I get there around 7:30 or so, and meet with students, teach classes, interact with students throughout the day, and then do research on top of that as well. So
now, research into what?
So my area of research is environmental regulations. So the Clean Power Plant rule that everyone, I'm sure has been talking about this week, right?
Yeah, screaming, yeah.
No, but I've really looked into how interest groups influence how agencies like the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, or the EPA have made decisions. So since Congress isn't making environmental policy, agencies are, and so we need to better understand that process.
So let's talk about that process, because it's really relevant and really recent. So you said something that I laughed at before the show. If you could restate what you said about the way that we influence policy nowadays.
Right. No. So I think I was just telling them this morning. So I teach a regulatory policy class. And so one argument that you could make is that you could actually participate more in agency rulemaking than you can by voting. But a lot of people aren't aware of that process. So that's why everyone should take my class this fall.
Now, that's kind of stabs at the heart of what a lot of people think the democratic process that we have is built for, right? I mean, it almost makes a kind of inclusive elitism for these certain agencies. They have a certain amount of respondents, or people that have the time, or people that have the money in order to write the draft papers to send to these agencies. I know this comes up fairly regularly because I talk with the Forest Service on a pretty regular basis. And I'll be like, oh, did you get any requests or submissions on so-and-so timber sale in such an area? Well, we've got 4 in so far. It's the first day we've been open. They're all 4 from these 4 groups that you've heard from 400 times before. Oh, okay, interesting. And they're like, we'll probably get a couple more in as well, but not a whole lot, And so, I guess it just seems to be concerning that it's not a vote from the public, it's a special interest dominated sort of system, it seems.
It's usually what happens. So I'd say on any given rule, I mean, unless like the rule list really had over 1 million comments, right? Same thing with the clean power plant rule. But I'd say on any given rule, you have 30 to 50, commenters. But usually it's the groups that are going to be directly impacted. So it's usually, what I've seen in my research is that it's, the regulated businesses that are usually, because if you don't submit a comment, you don't have standing to sue. And so groups that have a vested interest are going to submit a public comment on the Federal Register. So that way, if they get to the end and they feel like the process was unfair, then they have standing to sue at the end.
One of the things that you brought up before we went on the air said, and was just kind of maybe a toss-away comment, but was the fact that if Congress had simply done their job back in the 70s, with the whole Clean Water Act and all that, then we might not be sitting in this process where, every time we talk about the environmental policy of the EPA and the timber sales and the lawsuits and all that, the hue and cry is, this what is the name of the justice, equal justice deal where people get paid for suing and they get their expenses paid. In other words, it's become a cottage industry for environmental groups to fund themselves. That's the way it's perceived. But that whole process might have been completely avoided if Congress had simply manned or womaned or personed up and done their job back 40 years ago, right?
Well, it's really interesting, though, because a lot of scholars, and we talk about this in my classes a lot, is that the U.S. was kind of this leader in environmental policy in the 70s. And so we still have this really strong legislation, but you have to reauthorize that. And so the last time we reauthorized one of the big environmental policies was in the 1990s with the Clean Air Act. And so what you have is that Congress has delegated its authority to agencies to interpret that law, but you need to update it, right? And so an agency rule carries the same weight as a congressional law, and so agencies have the authority. So Congress has delegated their authority.
Is that even constitutional?
Yes, it is.
It is. Oh, rats.
Yes, it is.
Oh, rats. Yes. There goes my 1 point argument.
Darn! I'm going home now.
Let me backtrack just a second ago. You talked about the need for updating the policies. Like EPA was, 1970, 77 Clean Water Act, as you mentioned, the Clean Air Act, 1990s. Air and water, has all that much changed? What needs to be updated?
Well, the big concern today, and so obviously, we had a lot of smog issues, right, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but there's still concern, especially with climate change today. And so a lot of other nations are moving forward with that. And so that's what happened. Congress tried to pass legislation in 2003 through 2009 to address climate change. And so you had the states in the Northeast that sued the EPA saying, hey, EPA, you're not doing your job under the Clean Air Act. And so they had to move forward with these rules. And so the argument today is, and I know a lot of people are really upset about the Clean Power Plant rule, especially within our own state. But if you look at it, and there was legislation in 2009 that actually probably would have been a little bit less stringent. And so, So
basically, if you could go back a few years, you could have looked everybody in the eye and say, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, right? Okay.
Yeah, and so, the EPA is doing its job based upon what Congress has created them to do.
Okay, we're going to take a little break. If you have a question or comment, we'd love to have it. All three lines are open. Dr. Sara Rinfret is joining us here from the U of M Poli-Sci Department, and she is here, ladies and gentlemen, to talk to you and answer your questions, just like it was a classroom.
Also, sometime in the show, we're going to give away some tickets, right, Peter?
Yes, we certainly are. We have Neil Young coming to town, and I forget what the name of his band is. Doesn't matter. Neil Young's coming to town and on October 1st, and we are giving away free tickets, so listen sometime between now and 10 o'clock for your chance to call in.
Neil Young and the Peter Christians, I believe.
No, but I will be sitting in as drummer.
Okay,
so
good to know.
We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. We have one caller already and two lines open at 721-1290. Dr. Sara Rinfret joining us. She's a professor at the University of Montana Political Science Department, and John King is over there. I'm Peter Christian. Go ahead.
All right, you're a public policy wonk, right? Is that fair? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Guru?
A guru.
My passion.
Okay, real quick question. I read the White House brief on this. This is the brief not for people that actually study these laws, but for people that are just the public that are supposed to be convinced that they're great things.
Right.
And this brief says that I'm going to save $85 on my energy bill in dark black letters like every other page. This is a highlight thing. You think that's actually true?
If it's not,
If
Sure
it's
it
not,
is.
who's going to get the hit, right? No one. Come on,
Of course it's true.
Of course, it's true. You see her smile. Over there.
you guys see the audience doesn't get.
She has that enigmatic smile.
Enigmatic smile for sure.
All right, let's get to the phones because that's really what the show's all about. Is your comments, and Pascal is on. Good morning, Pascal. How are you, sir?
Morning. Hey, there was a comment made about the whether it was constitutional for the Congress to delegate their powers and authorities to these various agencies. I'm assuming that the doctor is saying that the Supreme Court has made that ruling, and of course I would say, according to the separation of powers, that that is not a final ruling. That Congress has the authority to overrule the Supreme Court. But my real question is, see, I know in Montana that we have agencies here as administrative rules and so forth, and we promulgate many rules as well here, and they have so many days, I think, before those rules actually become part of the code or the administrative code or whatever it is. And the legislature has so many days here in this state, I think, to overrule those rules or veto them or something. I wonder if that's true also in Congress. And the problem with Congress is they don't have the time to look at all these rules and actually say, okay, we have congressional oversight even though we've delegated it, but we don't have the time to look at every rule and overrule them.
Yeah, Congress can. I mean, they can go back. They have the authority to pass legislation to overturn the rule. And so that's their job to do so. And so if your constituents want you to overturn something and pass legislation, then that's their job to do so.
No, my comment is that those rules don't become actually codified law until so many days are passed. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And in that period of time, I think Congress can still intervene and say, no, we don't like that. Is that true?
Congress can come back and say, we're going to pass legislation to supersede
I'm not
this.
saying come back. I'm saying before the rule becomes law.
Yeah, it varies by state law versus federal law.
No.
So there's different processes.
There's
for
different
state
processes
agencies
for state
federally.
agencies. So each state has a different rulemaking process. The state of Montana, the state of Ohio, but then the federal level as well.
Yeah, so my point is, and what I'm asking is whether before the rule becomes law, Congress still has oversight over that rule and say, no, we don't like that rule, change it before it even becomes law.
Yeah, Congress can, at the state level, but Congress can, they have to pass legislation in both chambers to do that.
So what I'm saying is Congress doesn't have the time anymore to do that. What really they should do is should have congressional committees that actually has oversight.
Which they do.
And looks at these rules that's promulgated every year and say, we don't like that, we don't like this. But they don't take the time. They've actually lost the congressional oversight.
Let me ask you a question. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, this is
thanks for your call, Pat.
a stat that's stuck in my head, but I think it's about 2/3 of all the congressional oversight committees in Congress are in relation to environmental policy. 2/3 of all the congressional oversight, which is that about right? Does that sound close? Yeah, she's nodding her head, yes.
But actually, are they actually overseeing anything? That's the question.
And that's the thing. It's that's a huge amount of the bureaucratic wheel to be spinning on this one topic. If you think of all the other things out there, and all the other state agencies and duplicative agencies that do the same sort of work, it's a lot of work, right? I mean.
I think at the end of the day, too, though, I mean, who doesn't want to have clean air, clean drinking water, too, right? And at
the end of the day, who actually believes some chubby guy in Washington is going to bring them clean air?
Well, allow me to ask you this. Obviously, an oversight committee is, maybe 10, 15 people, whereas the entire Congress is 435, all right? I think it would be much easier for lobbyists to influence a committee member who has the power to make or break that rule than it would be to try to, influence every member of Congress. So isn't that kind of a problematic issue within these committees?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the committee structure, that's the case. But if you look at agency rulemaking, it's a little bit different. And so in terms of looking at influence, I mean, agencies are required to analyze the comments. So if you have 1 million comments, you have to respond to those. They have to be substantial, and they have to pertain to the rule. So in terms of influence, I think it's kind of different in the impact.
No, I'm just talking about, let me take you out to dinner and buy you a Ferrari, or you know what I mean? That's
well, that's
kind of
illegal.
Stuff.
Quid pro quo is illegal, but only if you don't delete the emails.
Only if you don't get caught. Anyway,
Snapchat, Peter.
Yeah,
Use
thank
Snapchat.
you, thank you. Yeah, we're going to take a little break. And Pete, if you don't mind hanging on just a minute, I want to give you plenty of time to make your comment. So we'll take this quick break, and we'll come right back with Dr. Sara Rinfret with the University of Montana Political Science Department. And unfortunately, we lost our caller. 721-1290 is our number. Well, we have all three lines open, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. And Pete is back, so we didn't lose him. Good morning, Pete. You're on with Dr. Rinfret. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And the question I had a couple of months ago when the Supreme Court made the ruling on the language interpretation of Obamacare, which was favorable to the existing, they also made a rule within a week of that of striking down the EPA rules with regard to the power plant situation. And I don't remember the exact language, but essentially they rejected the rulemaking authority of that.
Now, are you talking about the Supreme Court?
Yeah, he's talking about the mandated coal plant upgrades.
Okay.
And there was a ruling that they needed to go back and consider the cost. We read part of it on the air.
Yeah, okay.
And then now our president comes out with an executive order, essentially picking up what was thrown out and re-implementing it in ever fashion by an executive order.
Well, Dr. Rinfret is shaking her head, which you can't see on the radio. So go. What do you mean? What's going on with that?
So the rule was actually just finalized.
Hang on, Pete. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the rule was actually just finalized 2 weeks ago, and so I haven't read the entire. I think it's 1,500 pages.
Yeah, it's big.
Slacker.
Yeah, but they. I know.
Well,
right?
and the other thing that makes it hard, there was a draft release earlier if you wanted to get up and ready to go, and it's totally different than the draft release.
Well, and what happened though? So the notice of proposed rulemaking, and so that's why one of the best things about the process is that you can go in and read it. You can submit comments. You can go online and read all the comments. That's what I do on a daily basis. That's my passion. So if you're bored this afternoon, so you had time to do that, and so the agency has to respond to all those. So that's what they just did. They just issued the final rule, and now there's time. So any of those groups that submitted comments can sue the EPA, and so I think that's kind of what they're waiting for. But I did notice that the requirements for Montana actually went to 47% from 30%. But I was talking with my friend that works for the National Renewable Energy Lab, and he said that actually Montana could use that to their advantage with wind in the state to actually get credits, which will have a less of an impact on the state.
Okay. Now, Pete, did you want to continue your comment?
No, I was just confused on that Supreme Court ruling versus what's going on with the
Right.
Yeah, Sarah didn't really talk
Thanks for the
about
call.
that. So,
Yeah.
so he's referring to a court ruling before this act came out.
Right.
Where basically the Supreme Court chastised the EPA and the executive branch a little bit for being a little too headstrong on wanting change without considering the financial costs that change would involve.
Which the agency did have to do, and that was part of the final rule that just came out 2 weeks ago.
So my question for you is this new policy, it looks like the same old story at the Supreme Court level as this one. In fact, the economic hit for most states is considerably larger than the old policy. I don't see how it passes the same Supreme Court muster unless there's a whole lineup of new Supreme Court justices by the time it gets there.
Well, and again, this goes back to earlier comments. The Congress has the authority to come in and pass legislation, and so they tried to do that in 2009, and so Congress can come back and say, hey, this rule is too stringent. We're going to pass policy to supersede that, and they haven't done that.
Okay, we're going to take a break, top of the hour break here. And when we come back, Dr. Sara Rinfret joins us, the University of Montana Political Science Department, and she is an environmental policy specialist. And she would love to take your calls. Already taken a couple so far. Love to have some more. Or you can make your comments on our Facebook page. Happy to answer those as well. Our number is 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. We'll come back with more of Talkback after the top of the hour news from Fox. And we are back, hour number 2 of Talkback. John King over there. I'm Peter Christian, joining us here in the studio. Dr. Sara Rinfret. She is a professor with the University of Montana Political Science, Poli-Sci.
That's right. And what a great opportunity to speak with Sarah today. One of the great things is she's very cordial, and we disagree about everything. So it's going to be a great show. And we welcome your calls as well. So give us a call at 721-1290. We're talking specifically about environmental policy. and the way that it impacts us and the way it should be handled, the way Congress might or there's been many times on the show an injunction that Congress isn't doing its job from Sara, that they need to get out there and make more federal policy when it comes to the environment. I disagree, but we'll talk about that through this show. Also, before we get too far, we have a question from one of our listeners, Claire, and she says, specifically, where in the Constitution does it allow federal agencies authority over the people?
1946 Administrative Procedures Act. So Congress delegated its authority when the bureaucracy started to getting, the population grew. And Congress is like, hey, we don't have enough time to do this. They created agencies, so the 1946 Administrative Procedures Act.
Do you believe that the act itself is constitutional?
Yes.
Okay. And she says...
She's smiling.
She says, Claire follows up, she says, look up the Federal Register Act. Excuse me. Quote, a law that established the Federal Register as a daily gazette for the government. Orders from federal agencies or the executive branch do not become effective until they have been published in the Federal Register. In 1937, the Act was amended to create the Code for Federal Regulations, a set of paperback books that arrange effective regulations from the Federal Register by subject. Quote, end quote, I'm sorry. Then she says, I believe the comment period is 30 days before anything becomes an administrative rule.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the agency, usually what they do is they say, hey, we're going to create this new rule. They have an exchange, it's called ex parte communication. So they let businesses or a variety of groups saying, hey, we're thinking about this rule. And then they publish a notice of proposed rulemaking in the Federal Register. So anyone can go online. You can see what each agency is doing at any time. Usually at a minimum, it's 30 days, but sometimes they'll expand it if there's more interest. So 30 to 90 days. Once that comment period closes, they have to examine all those comments are required by law, so the Administrative Procedures Act. And, a question that I often get too is what happens. Businesses have actually been really good about sending substantial comments about the specific rule. And environmental groups will actually just send mass comments, like the Sierra Club, like they're trying to lobby a member of Congress, which is a completely different approach. And so I have a colleague that actually created software. So if you have the same comment over and over again, so if you submit 1 million comments, the same thing, they count that as one.
Oh,
so they'll take a note and say, okay, well, obviously the Sierra Club is really concerned about this, but they're looking for substantial comments.
Well, let me ask you this. Does it seem to you a little bit like our system has devolved into a non-substantial system where it's dominated by lobbyists and mass populism?
Special interest groups.
Special interests. It just seems so far away from what I would like my government to be.
Especially since these people, and again, this is just my perception as a guy that works 72 hours a day, okay? At my perception, these people have nothing else to do all day long but write letters and 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 sue, while the rest of us are reaping the unfortunate rewards of all that political action.
I mean, I think the larger question is that how do we encourage our youth to become more involved, right? And so that's my job, to encourage people to say, hey, this is a great process. We should participate in it. But you have to remember, too, that those groups represent a lot of constituents across the U.S. And so that's something that's really great about the U.S. is that you can join these groups. They're dues-paying members, so this is one of their benefits. But I think the larger question is that we need to encourage people to participate.
And let me throw out a solution, if you will, that's contrary to your solution.
By the way, the lines are open at 721-1290, so if you want to comment, I'd love to hear from you.
One of the things that you've been kind of hammering on or touching on over and over is the idea that the Congress needs to do more, that the federal government, specifically Congress, needs to do more when it comes to environmental policy, et cetera, et cetera. And frankly, I think that already the federal level bureaucracies have shown that they have done too much and can't do enough when it comes to the important stuff, and that most of these decisions should be done by the states, and that more power should be invested back into the states to handle environmental policy on a local level, because not only does it drive local involvement, you have people that actually knock on your door that you're going to be able to vote for that are actually going to be able to deal with the issue, but local management, I think, is better. It's not only better for participation, it decentralizes things, so it's harder for lobbyist groups with large money checks to control them. I mean, they'd have to decentralize themselves. It's more open. Most Montana government can be seen on video, and that's not the case for most federal hearings. I mean,
Well, you
C-SPAN
can watch
has a couple
C-SPAN. They're
channels.
all on there.
C-SPAN has, 3 channels now? But you're not going to catch every bureaucratic meeting, right? You're not going to catch the sub-meeting on the Bitterroot Forest, right? So, I mean, if you really want to have local involvement and local control, get the feds out of it and let the states start to chart their own path again.
Well, and like we were talking during the break, is that 90% of environmental policy is implemented at the state level. So there is quite a bit of state involvement.
Yeah, but it's federal policy that's implemented by the state, right?
Right. And so the concern is that if you have, we were talking about fracking earlier, and so we don't have a national policy of fracking. And so you have all these piecemeal policies. You know, you can say that states are the policy-making laboratories and kind of push the federal government to make a policy, right?
Which, by the way, is the way it was intended to be. We are supposed to be the laboratories for policy. That's why we were given federalism.
We're up against the break. We're having a great conversation. We'd love you to be a part of it. I know it's very entertaining, but it's much more entertaining when you get involved. 721-1290 is our number, and we're coming right back. Dr. Sara Rinfret is joining us here in studio. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. That's John King. I'm Peter Christian, Sara Rinfret. Dr. Rinfret joining us from the University of Montana Poli-Sci Department, and we're talking about environmental stuff. John and Sara are kind of a clash thing going on here. So we're talking about states versus federal involvement. And now, Sara, my problem is it just seems like the people in Washington, this is such a huge country, and they're so far away from what goes on here in western Montana. And it seems like, again, from my limited perspective, it seems like they try to come up with a one-size-fits-all policy and then try to shove it into a round or a triangular or a square or oblong hole, and many times it simply doesn't work, and the land and the wilderness suffers because of it, primarily due to fire. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think we have to remember, too, that we have elected representatives from Montana that are involved in that process, too. So
we have 3.
Right. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you're much of a numbers lady, but
no,
that's not
going to. I know.
Ain't going to cut the mustard.
3 out of 435, or 535.
535.
Yeah.
535.
Just saying.
Yeah. And
I realize John Tester's a big guy, but he's not that big.
He was in town yesterday.
Yeah, I know he was.
Yeah, he was talking about forests as well.
Yes, he was.
Right.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff. It's certainly a policy that affects us all, and frankly, as a Montanan, it's really easy for me to look out my window and say, the federal government has failed me.
Why is that?
Because I think that a lot of the smoke and the fires that we see are the result of poor management of federal lands. And it's a pretty easy case to make. I just look at the DNRC, look at the way the state handles its lands, the number of fire starts, the number of fires that get out of control. Look at the amount of money that's generated from those lands. They're not inaccessible. They're perfectly able to be hunted. They're perfectly able to be accessed. The state profits from them. We're able to make money and have jobs that are generated from that land. They're not damaged. They're not below par when it comes to federal lands. There's just not giant burn scars everywhere. And I look at that, and I look at what's going on in Idaho and in all these other federally managed areas where the trees are allowed to grow up, suck more water out, meaning less water gets to public or farming or down south to California or wherever it's headed. And the trees dry up because there's not enough. The climate wasn't built for these number of trees. Mm-hmm. And then they burn up. And we are all negatively impacted by it. And every time someone wants to make a timber sale or do something to change that, they get hit over and over with this brinksmanship from lawsuits that delays and stymies any kind of progress on that level. And I blame most of it on the NEPA legislation that we've had since the 70s or 1969.
Well, a lot of folks say with NEPA that it has a bite but no bark, right? And so you have to do the EIS process or the ESA process, right? And so, but you can still use the no action alternative, right? And so if you're going to build something or impact something due to the environment, you can still say, okay, we're going to choose to take the no action alternative. So going back to, it was passed in 1969, we haven't updated it since then.
So let me get this straight. Again, I'm a layman, all right? So what I hear you saying is that these agencies have 3 options. either approve or disapprove or take no action. Right?
Yeah, so the agency is required through NEPA saying, okay, well, you
And that's
might
for
set
that's for
aside
every
this
single
amount of
pro-
land to protect for this species.
That's for every single project that's brought to them?
Not every single. They might have 5 options, right?
Oh,
but
wow,
they
okay.
always can include a no action alternative.
Okay, all right.
So they don't have to take an actionable course of action.
Okay, well, let's get Harry on the line. Harry, go ahead.
I was just laughing.
Okay.
I'm taking the non-actionable course of action by not responding, Peter.
Harry, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Good morning. As for the environmental thing, you're saying the state should have more say, but that'd be fine and dandy if the environment stayed in that state. I mean, if you have Montana, or look back east, they have those or coal mining thing. They knock off top of the mountains and throw waste in the valleys.
Sure,
And
yeah.
that waste.
And when that happens, states sue each other.
But all that waste is seeping into the
It's true.
groundwater, and that groundwater goes down the river and goes down, all the way down to Mississippi. So I mean, so that people in that state like it because that's the only way they have jobs.
So, Harry, do you think the federal government should have supreme control over all federal land so that nobody would have an opportunity to comment or make any fuss about what they want to do?
Well, they do have comments. That's what you're saying.
No,
They have,
I know what I'm asking you. Do you think that because whenever you call, you always seem to take the side of the federal government, thinking that they're somehow wiser and have more resources and more wisdom than the people who are on the ground here in the states?
Well, the states are so easily bought. I mean, you had Tyson
Easily
Chicken.
bought.
Yeah, Tyson Chicken owned Arkansas. I mean, up here, Anaconda Company owned Montana for a while. I mean, if you have a big corporation that has lots of jobs in the state, you have a lot of sway in that state because guess what? People have jobs.
Yeah, GE has absolutely no control when it comes to federal policy at all.
Harry, are you saying that just kind of helps to level the playing field across the states?
Yeah, because you have giant corporations who can have lots of sway, and now don't have somebody over top of them. They have rights to pollute. I mean, because it's about making money.
But you're assuming that the federal government is this wonderful, benign, wise, beneficent, bureaucracy that knows all and sees all and does nothing wrong.
I wouldn't accuse him of that, but I would say
that's what I'm hearing.
I would say, Harry, that I think the government and maybe you, I don't know, they think too little of local management. The government. It's great at some levels. It's really great at many things. It's really great, but at local policy that's designed to implement and take care of a local environment, I frankly don't see why it would be a better manager than the people that live in the area and actually have access to it.
Well, because again, pollution across the state's boundaries. Our coal from our coal plants, the mercury goes to other people's land, air.
Look, I don't disagree with you that yes, our environment impacts neighboring states. But when that happens, the process is for states to sue each other for damaging their environment. This happens all the time. And you can do that to another state. It's really hard to do it to an agency like the EPA that just dumped all that pollution in Colorado.
Well, if you have coal plants in Montana and coal plants in Oregon and Idaho and all these, who do you sue? I mean, we get somebody in Colorado. Got mercury in their lakes, whatever. Who are they going to sue? You can't trace that mercury to any one state. I mean, it's all across the country. So I mean, it's a nice idea, but it doesn't.
Hang on, Harry, because Sara wants to agree with you. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's one of the concerns about non-point source pollution. And so how can you trace it back? And so that's a really big concern with the Clean Water Act is that how can you trace where it's coming from and who's actually to blame? And
so do I hear you, let me just clarify. Do I hear you saying, Sara, that essentially the federal government has the best mechanism to try to make that, to remedy that situation rather than these separate states?
I mean, that's just one of the issues with the Clean Water Act that needs to be addressed. So again, going back to 1970s legislation that needs to be updated.
Okay.
And so we don't have legislation for
Harry,
that.
thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. All right. We're going to come right back. We have all three lines open now. There goes one of them. 721-1290 is our number. Dr. Sara Rinfret joining us, U of M Poli-Sci Department. We're talking about environmental policy. And since we live right here in God's country, although you can't see it because of the fire smoke and everything, so
God's and Uncle Sam's country.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to come right back with more Talk Back in a moment. Oh, yeah. 721-1290 is the number. This is the Wednesday edition of Talkback, and we're talking every month. We have a special representative from the University of Montana Political Science Department, and today it's Dr. Sara Rinfret.
So I wanted to get your feedback because we haven't talked to Sara for a little bit. We've gone off. We've had callers go off. What's your take? I mean, obviously there's a struggle out there between this, who should manage what and to what extent. And how do you deal with that as a political science professor in your classes, or when it comes to actual governing, what do you think would be some good solutions we could all agree on?
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking during the break too. I mean, I think my biggest job as a political science professor is not to propagate my personal opinions, but I always tell my students my opinion doesn't matter. I'm here to share perspectives from both sides, and so they can make an informed decision. But I think going back to the federal state issue, I mean, this is kind of a classic 100-year debate, right? Classic debate of federalism. But I think too, going back to what Harry was saying, I think the biggest concern with environmental policy is that you have to have a national norm because there's a concern that you're going to have states racing to the top or the bottom. And so you're creating inequities across the states.
So just that line of argumentation that states are going to race to the bottom, right, and pollute themselves and their neighbors because they're not conscientious. I mean, don't you feel that kind of dehumanizes the states a little bit and the local governing authorities and assumes a little bit of more halo around the federal governing authorities? I mean, I think some federal legislators are great, but there's a lot of screw-ups. And there's a lot more that don't know anything about Montana than there are that do. No, I mean, I think that's, like I was saying, 90% of the policy is implemented, the federal legislation at the state level. So you have folks on the ground here that are, day to day carrying it out.
But they have to implement the federal statutes. They're not able to implement state-based statutes.
Well, they can implement state-based statutes if they supersede, if they're in addition to the federal legislation. So Colorado, California.
But hold on a second. You're blowing my mind here, because all I ever hear time and time and time again is that federal, supplants state.
Well, what she's saying is you have to be this strict, but you can be stricter.
You can be stricter.
So, for example, California has stricter legislation.
Oh, I got it.
So you're right still, Peter.
Okay, all right. Every now and then. Can I go home now?
Yeah.
I've been right once today, so that's all I'm allowed. Catherine, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Just kind of a response to some of what Harry was saying. There are a lot of people who dislike corporations, multinationals, with some with good reason, because of crony capitalism, et cetera, the influence of special interests, et cetera. One of the things that they don't like, or that people seem to not like, is the concept of monopolies. And yet they do not understand or acknowledge that the federal government is a monopoly on the giant scale, only it's a monopoly that you cannot go around unless you give up your citizenship and move to another country. You are subject, unfortunately, the people are now subject to whatever it is the federal government does.
But Catherine, it's supposedly a representative monopoly. I mean, does that make sense?
It's not anymore.
Okay.
It isn't, and it hasn't been for quite some time. We, the people, are supposed to be above the federal government and above the state governments, but we are not. There's way too many regulations and rules that govern just about every single aspect of an individual's life.
It's more like we, the lobbyists, and those who submit applications in the 30-day period for the law you didn't know was going to go into effect.
Exactly. And so my point, the main point I wanted to make, is that people they think somehow that the federal government exists and is made up of those who don't have human foibles, who don't have some sort of power struggles. If you've ever watched Washington at work, and if you've ever watched the bureaucracy at work, or known people who've worked within the civil service, it's full of people who are backbiting, who are not doing their jobs, who are
just like any industry, though.
Let me ask you this, Catherine. What kind of person is more traditionally drawn to an agency that would be able to tell people what to do?
Those who love telling people what to do.
It seems to draw people that want to be in control.
I think we're presuming a little too much of these people. I know a lot of these people. I mean, a lot of these are great people.
Okay.
I mean, you get a job. Why do you get a job? Why are you a radio host and not a drummer? Because of life circumstances.
I'd rather be a drummer.
I know. Certain things guide you in life, and it's not always because of your seek for ultimate power. I mean, it's not like we're all Thanos seeking the gauntlet to control the universe.
If I wanted to seek ultimate power, I wouldn't be the host of a local talk show in Missoula, Montana.
But once you have that power, you don't want to give it up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right.
Catherine, we got to run. Thanks for the call. All right. We're going to take a little break. Mike and Alan, we want to. We have to hose off here. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800 what?
Stay tuned. We're going to give those Neil Young tickets we teased earlier away soon.
And I do have my drumsticks in the car.
That's right.
So we'll be right back. Well, officially, she has been elevated to rock star status. Sara Rinfret is joining us here in studio. Well, when the lines are full, you're a rock star. That's the way she goes. So
everyone thinks they're calling in to talk to Neil Young.
Sorry,
Sarah.
Yeah, it's not me.
But she plays a heck of a bass guitar.
She's really amazing. We listened to it serenade during the break.
Let's get Mike on the line. Mike, you're on with Dr. Rinfret. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. Peter, first of all, I got a comment and then two questions. So on my first question, don't hang up on me yet, all right?
Okay, go.
Okay. And then I'd also want to say what John said and what Peter said. So they said it good. I wanted to talk about the BP oil spill, and then also put next to that the Colorado spill, the mine spill, and compare those two. In my opinion, I think the BP oil spill was nothing compared to the Colorado mine spill. It was 100 miles out in the ocean. I think it may have killed one or two people, or maybe a few more on the oil rig, but it didn't kill anybody else, and it really didn't affect anyone else except for the when it did come ashore, it killed some animals and whatnot.
Aside from the entire Gulf economy,
industry and fishermen.
Yes, but there's a reason. There's a lot of government reasons for that too. The ocean seemed to take care of that in about 2 or 3 weeks. It was gone. They couldn't even find the oil spill anymore. It did wreak some havoc onshore, of course. But if you look at the Colorado spill, this is an orange sludge that went all the way down to Lake Powell, right? And it went through several cities that contain thousands and thousands of people who rely on that water for drinking, for aquifer, for whatever else, for watering their fields, all this other stuff. And the stuff it deposited is still there, and it's going to affect all of those people. Who knows how many years down the road?
Can I throw in some extra? I don't have the same comparisons as you do. I guess I think the oil spill was worse than I think you do. But however, I did make a correlation during the break earlier between these two spills. Not necessarily the way you're doing it, but after the BP spill, BP got hit with a lot of fines, and also they paid a lot of money for remuneration to try to boost the industry.
You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I was going to ask her how do you think your guest? How do you think that the government handled that, and how do you think that the media handled the BP oil spill? We'll just go with that one first. What was your opinion on how they handled that?
The media, in terms of the response and the cleanup?
And the government, and what they did to BP.
I mean, I think that they were trying to, investigate what happened and why, and so we can prevent it from future. But I think with the Colorado spill, I was just talking to them during the break. I don't know if you've been reading about this, but there's been some issue between the current mine owner and then there's a Canadian company as well. And so there's concern about who's been discharging too much and at what point, and who's been monitoring this.
Okay, but you're kind of getting off my subject. I'll try and narrow it just by explaining what I think. I believe that the government fined BP way too much of what they should have, and they also went after them with a vengeance. I think that the media also went after BP with a vengeance, and it
because it's a big corporation, right?
Yes, and it exploded into a worldwide phenomenon, just like the lion that got shot by the dentist. I think that watching the EPA handle this spill in Colorado, the media handled it they just dropped it. I mean,
With-
after they
well-
talked about it for a little while.
Well, they
took
handle it.
pictures.
They handle it with kid gloves because
Yes, they did.
they have the governor. I think it was the governor of Colorado.
You're supposed to wear rubber gloves. I
Well, you know, taking a glass and dipping it in that and swigging it down. Say, nothing wrong
Yeah.
with this water.
Right,
You know, I mean, like,
right.
come on.
The
Exactly.
I think
And then-
I think that we have a case here where it's a lot easier to make a villain in one instance than the other. We were talking earlier about here's two of the things we know about the EPA or the spill in Colorado. One, the EPA opened the plug that spilt the sewage into the river.
And then they said, "Oops."
Number
We made a
two
mistake,
thing
sorry.
we know, they didn't report that they had opened the plug and spilt it into the river
For
for
3
20
days.
yeah, well, at least 24 hours. By the time that sludge had already made it out onto the farmland, already made it into city sewer systems, etc. I mean, there's a lot of negligence here that hasn't been highlighted, and we read the AP stories that come across the board here for KGVO News in the
And
morning.
there's not much.
And it's very skim, and it certainly
Really?
doesn't vilify the EPA at all, which I think there should be some light shown on the EPA. For it looks like to me, even if they should own up to the fact that they did it. And number two,
Well,
there should
they
be some.
did.
They did. You're right.
No, they
there
did-
should
they
be
did,
some.
but
There should be
they
some.
Did own up. They did own up to it, yes, but they also said, "Oh, look,
The
it's
lack
all
of-
okay now. Everything's fine," and it's not.
The lack of reporting on it after the fact and notifying local officials is a really big deal.
Yes, and
Right.
I'd like to also compare that. Now, this is way off topic, but look at the way that they're treating the thing with Hillary and the emails and the government cover up, and look at the way they treated Martha Stewart. They put her in jail for something I think's a lot less of a deal
Well,
than what Hillary's
you're
doing.
right about being off track.
Hey, Mike,
Thanks for your call, sir.
we're up against the break, Mike. Thanks for the call, man.
Okay, thanks.
Appreciate it, buddy. All right, Alan and Marilyn, you guys are up next, and we have one line open. So we're somewhere around here. We're getting back into the environment, so we're going to come right back with
Martha
more
Stewart.
with Dr. Sara Rinfret in just a moment. Although she does look good in like a sludge orange, but
I will
anyway.
bake cookies during the break.
Welcome back. All right, this is Talk Back. I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist. 721-1290 is our number. And Dr. Sara Rinfret, she's saying, do you guys get paid for this? This is like nuts. What are you guys doing here? Anyway, all three lines are full, so let's jump right back into the fray. Unless you didn't have much chance to comment on that, on what Mike said. So do you have any?
No, I mean, just as questions about the BP oil spill, I think that the communities are still being negatively affected by it, and so it's not over.
All right.
Let's go to caller 3.
Absolutely. That's line number 3. Alan, you're on. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Since the doctor likes all these regulations, I was wondering what she thinks about the idea of requiring federal agencies to obey these regulations just like the rest of us have to.
They do.
How?
They're U.S. citizens as well, so they have...
Is EPA being sued for what they did in Colorado?
This whole thing is still too early to tell. It's still pending.
Is
It
the
just
Forest
happened.
Service being sued for the smoke we've got in the air right now?
No.
We've
I
got
think
a
there
double
is
standard here.
There. I'll be honest. It does seem to me that there is a little bit of a double standard when it comes to federal agencies. They get to slide on a lot of things. Just come and look at my email, boss.
Allow me to ask Dr. Rinfret a question. Is it possible for a group of citizens, say from the Bitterroot or from Idaho, to get together and sue the U.S. Forest Service over their lack of proper care of the national forest?
Yeah, they could do that. I mean, there was a group of students that just sued President Obama about climate change.
But why isn't the Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General, suing on behalf of the people? Why should the people have to spend their money for what these government agencies do and have to pay twice, pay for what they do and pay for their salaries? I mean, it just seems to me if I was to go out and pollute like the Forest Service is doing right now, the federal government would come after me. So why shouldn't the federal government go after these federal agencies?
You know, it's really interesting, though, because I think there's three sides to the story right now, right? And so the EPA, this just happened. And then Hennis, the current mine owner, is actually blaming a Canadian company for creating the problem and actually allowing too much discharge into the water over time. And so that created this pressure. And so Congress will do an oversight hearing, and they will place blame on someone, and someone will have to face the consequences.
But it won't be EPA. Watch, I'll bet.
I mean, if the EPA is found at fault, then they will have to face the consequences. That's part of the process.
What would that consequences be?
Yeah, that's my question too. I mean, it's
someone's going to lose their job.
They get fired.
Just look at what happened to the IRS. No one lost their job. No, I mean, seriously, people just get put in a different bureaucratic seat, right?
They usually get fired.
Really?
I can't think of any federal employee that's been fired in the last 100 years.
All right. Well. Mike, I'm sorry, Alan, we got to move on. Thanks for the call. Appreciate that. Okay, Marilyn, you're on Talkback with Dr. Sara Rinfret. Go ahead.
Okay, one call just adds to more and more that I want to say. But anyways, Harry, Catherine, Alan, okay, there's a whole culture of corruption out there. There's books that show that there's a whole pay-to-play system, the crony capitalism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, and unions, certain corporations, they get the bids on certain things, federal projects that the feds want to do or liberties they want to take away from us, and whoever buys into that gets the money. And, it all ends up affecting us. And these forest fires were predicted by local loggers, a long time ago. They said this was going to happen because they weren't being allowed to, the lumber mills were being shut down by the land being taken over by the feds or the environmentalists screaming and yelling and suing and suing and suing and suing and it's little guys out here that are left to suffer.
So Marilyn, do you have a specific question for Sara? Or are you just mad?
Okay, well, I'm always just mad about everything. It's just all piling up. But how about, the Superfund site whole thing issue? I'm finding out that a lot of these projects that are done, like even school lunches for the kids, that's not about feeding the kids. That was about getting more union jobs.
I'm looking for a question here. We have a limited amount of time and a lot of people, so go ahead.
Okay, the river, the spill, the environment.
All right.
If that gets turned into a Superfund site, which I'm told this is what that was all about, it was on purpose accident to cause that to get some Superfund money. Who gets that job, that money? It all goes back to the government.
There's an account under CERCLA. There's an account under federal
Marilyn.
legislation that will clean it up.
Okay, go ahead. Repeat that for me.
Yeah, there's, you had the RCRA and CERCLA legislation, so there's Superfund money set aside to clean up sites like that.
Okay.
And there's a priority list that you have to be on to have it cleaned up.
And that money goes from where to where?
There's money set aside in the federal government to help clean up projects like that.
Okay, and so the cleanup funds, in other words, it doesn't go to a state, it just goes to cleaning up that part of the river.
Yes, that's correct.
You have to be put on a
priority
list.
There's a priority list that's on the website.
And
you can
to get on the priority list, usually a governor or a mayor has to recommend a site in their executive domain to be on that list.
And so any individual or company or group doesn't get any of that money, like a civil action, right?
So, for example, the aluminum company here in Montana was recently recommended by Governor Bullock for that, and that's the beginning step of that process.
Right.
All right. So let's continue. And Dave, thanks for holding. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. About state lands and federal lands, I'd like to say that, Forest Service brings in lots of dollars into the state. These are dollars from Florida and New York, and so if the state is to take over that land, they would lose those federal dollars. And again, pollution is money into the state. Fires is money into the state. If we're going to convert over to state land,
Dave, hold on just a minute. Can you imagine how much more money the state would make if we didn't have fires raging in the national forest? Let me finish. In the national forests every single summer, driving tourists away looking for some place where they could breathe.
Well, right now they can always go to different, like Yellowstone Park at the moment. It's certainly, there is money to be made in pollution. Superfund sites are money. There are businesses all over the state that are making money because of the fires.
Wow. There's always money to be made. When a broken window happens, a glazier makes money.
Right.
But this is, as Mr. Hazlitt explains in Economics in One Lesson, that's not really the best way to make money.
I agree.
It'd be better if we didn't have looters destroying windows sometimes.
I agree, but I know businesses. There's a business right across the street that makes its money off fires.
I hear you.
And I'm just saying, if the state was to take over the fund, or let's say eliminate Forest Service from the state of Montana would have to fight fires, and they wouldn't go away completely, even if the state owned all the land.
No, you're right.
There would still be fires, and the state of
But
Montana would have to fight
it might take a while, but I think the state would be in a lot better shape after a decade or so. Hey, listen, we're up against a break. Thanks for your call.
By the way, the state already does that.
Yeah, 721-1290 is our number. Mike, we're going to get you on here in just a moment, and we have two lines open. We'll be right back. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Right now, the first caller at 721-1290 gets 2 tickets to see Neil Young in concert. Right now, first caller. All right? 721-1290, call right now. So let's get Mike on the line. Mike, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question for you kids. How many of you were over 21 in 1963?
Not me.
Not you? Not any of you. Then do you have any idea how dirty the air was in 1963 from slash burning, from logging operations? No, you don't, because you weren't alive then. I was alive then. We had just as much more smoke, or a hell of a lot worse than we got now. This looks pretty good to what we had in 63 when the slash burning was going on.
Now what about, do you remember TP burners, Mike?
Oh, I definitely know about TP burners.
Okay.
I also know that there was a huge industry of logging, and we burnt the slash up. It was piled. There was guys who had whole businesses doing nothing but piling brush with cats and burning the slash. But I guarantee you the smoke was there, and they got put out of business because the smoke was too bad. And anybody dumb enough to suggest that the state owns the land, or the Forest Service land, or I don't care who owns the land, is going to stop a fire from burning on timber, you are a card short of a full deck, believe me. And by the way, there's one thing that always tickles me when I listen to the radio. Well, the air quality outside is really bad, so don't go outside. Isn't that the same air that's in your house? You knucklehead, you might as well go out inside and ignore it.
All right, Mike, thanks for the call.
Yeah, well, if it's around 1963, you know what I'm talking about.
All right,
in the 60s, because I know what I was talking about.
Sarah is giving you a thumbs up on that one. All right, thanks for the call. So your comments, Sarah. Go ahead.
No, I mean, the air quality has improved, but, it can always get better.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is that if what?
I just, before I get more calls, I want to say that we got a winner.
We do have a winner, yes.
Sean won the tickets to Neil Young today. Congratulations, Sean. I hope you have a great date. We will give away tickets tomorrow, but all the people calling me right now, you can just give up. It's over. It's over for today.
So let's do this. Do that. Do that. Do that. Okay, there we go. 721-1290. If you want to make a comment on what we're talking about today with Dr. Sara Rinfret, we'd love to have you give us a call. Now, it doesn't have to be about the whole forest fire thing. You work in the political science department, right? And you were an environmental specialist.
Yes.
So now, why did you choose that specialty?
I think just growing up in Ohio, too. I mean, there was a lot of issues. I mean, my grandfather is a farmer, and so just kind of respect for the land and just understanding the process, right? And so, and going through school, again, we don't have policies that have been updated since the early 70s, and so what can we do to kind of affect change and make sure that policymakers are updating the policies?
Now, in the year or so you've been in Montana, what specifically have you noticed as far as the way, state and federal lands? There's a large majority of federal lands here in Montana, much larger than the state-controlled lands.
Different than Ohio, I assume.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So how do you see as far as all that's getting along? How is it merging? How is it working together, in your view, as a political science professor?
I mean, I think the one thing that I've noticed from my students is just the amount of respect that people have for the land that I've never seen anywhere else, which I think is remarkable.
There's a lot of passion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people love Montana. It's obvious why. And I just think that people the utmost respect that they have for the land is really, really passionate.
It is certainly something that touches on, as we were talking about before the show, I think, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or a Greenie in Montana. We're all deeply invested in being able to get out in the wilderness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Except for Peter. Most of us, get out and hike and hunt and stuff.
I drive by the woods and wave all the time.
He flies over them at night.
I do. Okay, now for folks, oh wow, I'm going to get it now. Dr. Rinfret, if folks want to find out more about what you guys do in the political science department, how do they find out more about that?
Yeah, check out our website.
Aside from registering and paying for classes.
Yeah, come on down. No, we have a political science webpage. I'm also involved in our Masters of Public Administration program. So if anyone wants to check that out too, we have an online program that's pretty awesome. So yeah, we have a website. If you just go to the University of Montana and the search engine, you can just type in political science, and that's where you can find us.
So let me ask you, and seriously, we have exactly 2 minutes left in the program. What can someone do realistically, career-wise, with a political science degree?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of students this year that are currently working on campaigns. You can go into the academic world. You can be a lobbyist if you would like. You can work for an agency. Some groups end up being the governmental liaison for a company, nonprofit work. There's a lot of things. I think people are like, oh, political science, what a horrible degree. But it's, I mean, it's a really great degree to have. And it's something that if you get a bachelor's degree that you can get a job. So
yeah, I have an English degree, so I have no room to talk.
I have no degree at all. I have less than no room to talk. But I'm still young, ladies and gentlemen. I have promised at age 65, when they don't charge me tuition, I'm going back to school.
I will say the political science department talks about the things that interest me a lot more.
Yeah, they certainly do.
You can come on
deeper
back.
level, yeah. You know, I might if you guys give me some free tuition or something. I'm already paying to send one person back to school.
All right, 721-1290 is our number. We have exactly 1 minute left in the program, so if we can get one more caller in, we'll see if we can do that.
Thank you for reminding me.
Why?
Marilyn wanted an answer to the question, who gets the money from the Superfund when they come into
the local community, so they clean that up, the local community. So if you think about the Love Canal site or any of the big Times Beach, and so the local community, they use that to clean that up.
And a lot of that money goes to different agencies or businesses
right,
that do
the
the type of
agencies.
work
So like the
that's
EPA
needed.
has so they kind of delegate that money.
They contract that out to local folks to do to actually do the work.
Okay. Sorry about the wait there. I got Neil Young'd.
That's okay.
Maryland.
So what's coming up in tomorrow's fabulous radio program?
Well, it's almost school season, so we'll be speaking with Superintendent Mark Thane from Missoula County Public Schools.
Wonderful.
I'm sure that he will be talking a lot about the bond issue, $158 million.
It sounds like Sara might join us too.
Yeah, and the Missoula Board of Realtors has come out in favor of the bond issue. So with that, you guys have a great day and enjoy, and don't breathe too deeply out there.